Hi there, I'm Nico DeHaan, and welcome to Living a Primal Lifestyle, where we explore a return to a more balanced and natural wild world.
To recover our natural health and regain our rights and freedoms, and I'm Ellen DeHaan.
It's a beautiful day in Durango, Colorado. It's 69 degrees, going up to 83, and getting a little cold spell, so it's kind of nice. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Living a Primal Lifestyle. Hit the notification bell, hit the like button to help our channel grow. We also show these videos on Facebook and LinkedIn for your convenience. And all the topics in today's show are in the show notes, listed below in the description so you can follow along and do some of your own research. We highly recommend Mother Earth Labs for all your vitamin needs if you wish to enhance your diet with natural and effective supplements. Hit the link in the show notes to maximize your nutrition with humic and fulvic and essential multivitamins. These two products give you all the essential vitamins, minerals, and amino acids required for a healthy immune system with the ability to access them to your body and to detox at the same time. They may also make a lot of other things you may be interested in. And today's show is called Remember, Live Long and Prosper, and have some coffee. Let's get started. Yeah, I think it's funny, yeah.
I think it's funny.
Okay, of course, what we do here as 70-year-olds and living in America, we go through the news and see what's healthy and what's not healthy and what's recommended. And we kind of deconstruct it and see what we think about it, because there's a lot of conflicting things out there. So let's start today with the first one, is the article from CNN called Pre-Travel Testing Requirement Lifted. What you need to know about the new U.S. travel policy. So yeah, this is good news.
It seems to apply to anybody who's traveling into the United States.
Yeah, so no longer are they requiring a positive test or a negative test.
Yeah.
I wonder what they do if you have a positive test.
Well, you don't have to test at all.
You don't have to test at all, so we're all in the dark here. It says here that many travelers in the United States and abroad have been waiting for it. The travel industry has been pushing for it, and on Sunday, that's this past Sunday on the 12th, the end arrived to the requirement for travelers to test negative for COVID before entering the U.S.
Yeah, let's see, the CDC said widespread uptake of highly effective vaccines, the availability of effective therapeutics, and the accrual of high rates of vaccine and infection-induced immunity at the population level in the United States have all helped lower the risk of severe disease and death.
Yeah, so this statement alone, a widespread uptick of highly effective COVID-19 vaccines.
Uptake?
Yeah, I think that's questionable whether they're highly effective or not.
I think...
I mean, they are somewhat effective.
I understand what you're saying, and setting that aside...
Yes.
This paragraph is extremely interesting because it now includes therapeutics. And it now includes infection-induced immunity, which neither of those things had been mentioned in the past.
Well, I think the therapeutics, last time they were kind of mentioning it, so it's been slowly creeping in. But remember, they're talking about the therapeutics that are legal, not the ones that they kind of have
well, they're all legal, but they are recommended.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the word.
And the other thing you mentioned, too, the infected-induced immunity. Which they've really never...
they haven't been acknowledging.
Exactly. Yeah.
But little by little, it's sneaking into the vernacular.
So when will the pre-testing requirement be lifted? It lifted on June 12th at 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time. This means flights departing to the United States from a country or at any other or after that time no longer have to present a negative test.
Or documentation of recovery in the past 90 days. But again, this does only apply to air. It does not apply to land or ferry port.
And also, it seems like it's only impacted people who are citizens of this country.
No, I think it's U.S. travelers. Oh, well, first of all, the vaccination requirements don't apply to U.S. citizens at all, and foreign arrivals no longer, it does say travelers who are 18 and older who are not U.S. citizens. U.S. citizens legal permanent residents or immigrants must be fully vaccinated to travel to the United States with limited exceptions. I think that what they did was lift the requirement that you prove it.
Okay. So children are 17 and under are not required to be vaccinated. What about unvaccinated Americans? The end of the testing requirement applies to all travelers previously required to present negative test results, and vaccination requirements to enter the United States do not apply to U.S. citizens.
Right. So this is a little confusing, but
It is for us because I'm not a citizen, you are.
yeah, don't go anywhere, honey.
Okay. Not going anywhere, folks.
Yeah, so they do. Previously, COVID testing was not required for entry via a land or ferry port. So if you drove through a checkpoint at the border or something, you didn't have to have testing.
Yeah.
Non-U.S. travelers who are 18 and older have to be fully vaccinated. Non-U.S.
Of course, if people have symptoms or exposure while traveling, they need to get tested. And if they test positive, you follow the CDC's isolation guidelines.
So it's like 5 days, well, some countries are still requiring 2 weeks, and it's still a little bit of a morass, as we say.
Well, at least there's some progress being made.
Yes, some progress being made.
The other COVID
The next article.
This COVID wave might be the start of our new normal, an expert says, and here's what you need to know. So in reality, the COVID-19 cases are steadily increasing nationwide since the end of March. Hospitalizations and death rates remain low and will likely stay that way. But beyond that, many experts say they're unable to predict the trajectory of the current wave, and including how and when it will end.
And given the past 2 years of the pandemic, whatever's been going on, the CNBC article says they were somewhat surprised by that. And it seems like it might be one indicator of many of the ongoing rising cases that's noticeably different than previous COVID surges. So some experts are saying it might mark the beginning of the country's new normal.
Whatever that may be.
Yeah.
Well, at the dojo, I've noticed that a couple of people are out because of the coughs and just, various symptoms. A lot of people are testing negative. The ones that are testing positive just stay home for a little while, and when they feel better, they come back.
And I think it comes down to how they feel rather than
I think so.
worrying about anything else.
Yeah,
Really.
so we're not panicked as much, and nobody's really surprised by this anymore. It's just kind of, this is how we're living. So I guess it is the new normal in a way.
Well, it says here that previous surges were caused by the emergence of new COVID variants. This particular wave is powered by waning immunities, they say. It says Dr. David Dowdy, who's an associate professor of epidemiology at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and a physician with the Baltimore Medical Services. So this is kind of a strange paragraph. I was having trouble with it. The immunity people gained by recovering from the Omicron wave in December and January is fading away, allowing Omicron and its subvariants to make their rounds again, says the doctor. And many Americans aren't taking particularly strict COVID precautions anymore, assuming if they get sick, they'll likely recover without being hospitalized.
Yeah, taken together, this helps explain the past few months of rising cases. The country's 7-day rolling average of new cases is up to 109,000 or more as of Wednesday, according to the Center of Disease Control and Prevention. The large number is likely significant undercount, with many people now relying on home tests, which we know aren't that reliable anyway.
Right.
And none of them are reporting the results.
Yeah, but I think that the point here was, instead of having the entire country suddenly inundated by another wave, they're finding it's kind of going, and it's sometimes geographically isolated. So maybe you get an uptick in New York, but not in Florida.
Yeah, it's kind of more like the common flu.
Like a flu, right?
Like a cold type of thing.
Like the old-fashioned things that we used to say.
So hopefully things are getting back to normal. That would be kind of nice.
Yeah, well, and the end of the article, they recommend that you build a COVID prevention strategy into your daily routine. So stay up to date on your vaccines and get comfortable with self-testing at home on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think this adds more to stress. I think just forgetting about it is a lot better. Let's get back to normal and do our normal things and live our lives. And if you catch something, you deal with it.
Right.
That's what we've always done.
Yeah, and it does say if you test positive, quarantine or isolate yourself.
Exactly. Well, I still have the sniffles, but I think it's still allergies here because I still see yellow stuff all over the place.
You've had sniffles for years.
Well, that's true too. No doubt about that. Yeah. Okay, so this next article comes from inverse.com. It's called "This Coffee Hack Can Improve Your Gut Health and Make You Live Longer." We're always into things that make us live longer.
Right, and we've talked about coffee
Yes,
on a
we are
number of
coffee.
shows because articles keep coming out showing the benefits of coffee. Now, in this particular article, they're talking about a study that found that moderate coffee drinkers, including decaf, showed the lowest risk for mortality.
Yeah, this is interesting because it's kind of like alcohol. If you have none, or if you do it too
Excessively.
much, then your health goes down the tubes. Not really down the tubes, but
But
less.
you're
So
more in
if you're-
jeopardy
if-
of having health
Yeah,
problems.
so if you're in this little safety zone of having 1 or 2 cups, maybe 3 cups, then, and what you do to the coffee itself makes a big difference. I've always, throughout most of my life, I've used just black coffee. That's the way I started. And in the afternoon, sometimes if I have a coffee after noon, I will put some honey in it or maybe some sugar or something like that to sweeten up and take that edge off, which I really like in the morning. In the afternoon, it's not as necessary, I feel. Maybe because
Well, you also put MCT oil in.
well, yeah, that was when we discovered the
Bulletproof.
coffee. We kind of went along with that and let's see what it does. And what I felt immediately, it brought memories of that whole cream. When I was a youngster, my parents drank coffee or tea with that whole cream. And then in later years, they started using half and half, and I didn't like it as much. And then finally one day I says, no, maybe I can just drink it, straight. And I tested it and goes, yeah, that's not bad. So that's what happened
You get
to me
used
anyway.
to it. But in my situation, it was I'd never drank coffee ever until just a really relatively few years ago. What was it?
Well, until you met me, really.
No, I didn't drink any coffee when I first met you.
Not at first, but
when we renovated our old house
that's right.
and
we
were
had
gifted with a $5
right.
espresso maker
Little Krups.
from Salvation Army that he had found, and
Yeah, this little worker who was doing work in the yard and stuff like that was going back to Tennessee, if I remember correctly.
Maine, I
or
think.
Maine.
Yeah, it was
whatever.
Maine. He could,
Yep.
and he was taking only what he could carry in two backpacks, basically.
Yeah,
so
because it was on his bicycle, I think, or
I don't know what he
motorcycle or
was
something.
doing. He was
Anyway,
he was an
gave us this
interesting
little,
person.
yeah, he gave us this little Krups. We still have it.
We still have it.
Yeah, kind of momentum sitting on the shelf.
Memento.
But, memento, yeah. not
Not momentum.
losses, yeah. But anyway, we started using that.
And my point was that I never drank coffee because I really, really didn't like the buzz and the weird feeling that I got after I drank some coffee.
Which most people seek, it seems like.
Well, or they certainly notice it,
Yeah.
and so what I did when we discovered the bulletproof coffee,
That's when we
I
started
started
making the
using
espresso.
the MCT oil in it.
A little
And,
butter.
and a little, sometimes, occasionally a little butter because I'm trying to limit my dairy.
well,
And-
plus you're allergic to a lot of the butters. Kerrygold, not so much because I think that's made with the A2 cow
Right.
instead of the A1
Yeah.
cow, which doesn't have the same enzymes in it, so it's a little easier on the body.
Yeah, the past year or so, I've become much more able to digest a little bit of butter or some cream cheese, and But the point was that when you put the MCT oil or the butter into the coffee, or even a little cream into the coffee, it creates
Smooths it
it creates kind of a time release
Yeah.
so that you don't get that buzz
Yeah, it kind of just evens out that you feel a little
Less,
upsurge, but
yeah.
then it's just calming.
And it lasts a long time.
It does, yeah. So, research found that the moderate coffee drinkers. Oh, did you do that whole thing? The research describes the trend between coffee and mortality risk at a U-shaped curve, and again, that is in the center here. It's kind of an upside-down U.
Right.
So if you don't drink much coffee, you're at a higher risk. If you drink too much, you're at a higher risk. But if you have that 1 to 3 cups a day on the average, then you have the lowest risk of mortality.
Lower.
Lower. The
Yeah,
lowest.
it does say lowest, by up to
does,
30%. And you derive the most benefits from the drink. Are talking about either black coffee or lightly sweetened coffee. And
And the other thing is that study doesn't necessarily say anything about the effects of artificial sweeteners.
well, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, in fact, while the study concluded that moderate consumption of unsweetened and sugar-sweetened coffee links to a lower risk of death, the association between artificially sweetened coffee and mortality was less consistent. We are of the opinion that the artificial sweeteners kind of trick your body.
And they can damage, really do damage.
Maybe you're not as sensitive to the sweetness as possible because it's artificially being stimulated.
And there are some studies that have shown that the artificial sweeteners are connected to brain tumors. And
that, and also sensitivity, insulin sensitivity and things like that. So.
Yeah, so not a good thing, but all right. So a gastroenterologist at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, who is not involved in this particular research, says coffee is great for the tiny zoo inside of all of us, the gut microbiome. There's no question that coffee and caffeine as a stimulant improves the gut microbiome.
Yeah, for many people, coffee boosts gut motility, which in other words, it makes you go to the bathroom because it triggers the gastrolic reflex. Gastrocolic reflex that tells your large intestines to clear out.
Yeah, it stimulates production of the hormone gastrin, which helps create stomach acid. So staying regular and flushing out old food is a great way to get rid of the bacteria you don't need anymore in your colon. And if you don't get rid of that stuff, then there are consequences.
Well, naturally, if you can't go to the bathroom, the life is over. In a sense, you know. So. Another thing too, we should talk a little bit about the quality of the coffee that we drink. So we try to get the best. We usually try to get to local brewers, and we mix it up. In other words, we'll take some medium roast, and we'll take some dark roast, and usually 3 different kinds from 3 different
3 to 4, depending on
2, 3 different roasters, and then we put them all together and blend them together. And we found that was a nice way of experiencing all the different blends,
the flavors.
And the flavors.
Yeah, it's important to get organic coffee beans, and then we buy them locally roasted, is what it is, because we don't grow coffee maybe in Colorado they do grow some coffee,
I don't know.
But it's locally roasted, so it's very fresh and
of course, all the news is always telling you eat your fruits and vegetables, and here's a fruit. Which is
coffee beans are a
this
fruit.
is a good way to have your fruit.
And they're brimming with antioxidants, with minerals and organic plant compounds that are good for you. So
we're still not totally clear on the mechanisms of how coffee affects and boosts our health, they say. But we do know that regulating gut motility improves the microbiome. A healthy gut biome is a pillar of holistic health and longevity.
Yeah, the gut microbiome becomes less diverse as you age. So it helps. This article says that they believe that coffee helps stimulate the microbiome, let it stay healthy and whole. And
they have a little warning: too much sugar isn't that great for you. It goes into hyperdrive. That's your system. While it's normally takes about 4 hours to digest most proteins. Carbohydrates move through the stomach in only about 2 hours, and that's part of the excessive sugars.
That's
a part of the sugar's negative effect on the cardiovascular system. And that's not just sugar, but that's any kind of carbohydrate that's highly refined. It just
because
triggers,
it converts.
It converts very quickly to
So
sucrose.
what's the order in which you should eat like protein, carbs, fruit, vegetables?
Well, I always go saying the protein first.
Because it takes the longest to
fat.
digest.
Yeah, and this fat that accompanies the protein usually,
Right.
it usually doesn't go along with carbohydrates as much, although they do pair together. But protein and fat together, you get all the kind of maintenance that you need for your body from the protein, and then the fuel is the
Carbohydrates.
is the fat.
Oh, the fat.
Yeah, and the carbohydrates are just something like a super fat that gets digested very quickly, and that's really why it's not that good for you. So,
Well, you're saying that if you eat your protein first, it's the first thing into the stomach, and the stomach can get working on it.
right.
Otherwise,
And that
now if you
produces all
don't,
the bile and everything that goes into your stomach.
so
for
what if you
digestion.
don't eat the protein first? Let's say you ate all your vegetables first, and then you ate your potatoes or whatever.
Yeah, if you eat
and then you
carbohydrates.
ate.
Yeah, if you eat carbohydrates first, it sends a real signal to your insulin. It spikes the insulin because there's more sugar entering your body. So your body is getting a flush of insulin, which kind of acts the same way as the sucrose does in the blood. So it kind of doubles the sugar up in a sense.
Well, what
And-
about how do you digest?
Well, what happens is it goes right into the bloodstream, and then your body kind of goes into hyper super drive, and it says, okay, now I have to get rid of the sugar that I just ingested. And this is indicated by how much insulin is there. So for your body to get rid of it, it can't burn it that fast, so it has to store it. So by storing it, what happens is that it turns into fat. And this is why people gain weight on a high carbohydrate
Yeah, but I was
diet.
going.
So
I'm
I'm coming back full circle.
Okay.
If you don't do that, you eat the protein first, your body starts to act kind of normally. It doesn't spike the sugar. And then if you add the carbohydrates later, your body's already doing its work and it's not really so sensitive to it.
Okay, so one other
yeah.
where I'm also trying to get to is if you don't eat the protein first, it then sits in your stomach while the other stuff gets digested.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about,
That's what I'm talking
yeah,
about.
because your carbohydrates do digest first.
Yeah.
And they digest faster. So the protein is kind of waiting in there.
Yes.
Where if you start with the protein, it's already starting to digest, and the other stuff doesn't matter. This
So is
is
that
the way it
healthier?
was.
Is that better?
It is much better for you, and it doesn't spike anything, and you don't get that later on, that kind of drowsy feeling later on too. So always eat the meat first with the fat. And then if you want to have, and this is why dessert is always carbohydrates, kind of, maybe
Sugar.
some fat. Yeah. So this is why dessert is always after the meal. Because we really, if you think back 100 years, we didn't eat that much carbohydrates. Especially
because it wasn't
refined.
available.
It really wasn't available, and certainly thousands and thousands of years ago, that was never available. Not until we started formulating the bread and stuff like that, and incorporating it more and more into our lives.
And the potatoes and the rice and the other
It just compounds
pasta
everything.
that we've evolved.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so the next one.
Ketogenic diet helps mouse muscle stem cells survive stress.
Yes. And so this is an interesting thing. So fasting sends muscle stem cells into a deep resting state that slows muscle repair, but also makes them more resistant to stress, according to a study from Stanford Medicine. Yeah. And this was done on laboratory mice, which we always seem to use. Now, this protective effect can also be achieved by feeding the mice a high-fat and low-carbohydrate diet. And that is what we call the paleo-style diet, or the ketogenic diet. So,
Well, that was interesting to me because eating keto mimics how the body responds to fasting. And by giving the animals the ketone bodies, the byproducts that occur that occur when the body uses fat as an energy source, which is what the purpose of the keto diet is, to get you
it
to burn
switches
fat.
from sucrose to fat, which is the fat is the nice slow burning, sucrose is that fast burning stuff. So it just makes sense that if you I kind of make it like when we used to go to the drag strip when I was young, when I was a kid. We go to the drag strip and we put gas in our car and we drive to the drag strip. And if you're going to be on the drag strip and you want to be really fast, you need a higher octane fuel. So a lot of times they have these little canisters of nitro, glycerin, which they add to the gasoline to get you to the strip faster. So this burns very quickly.
But it also gives a huge amount of energy.
Yeah, huge amount of energy. So the reason we don't use it on the street is because you'd have to use so much of it. So
and you can't go that fast on the street.
Yeah, not too.
Too much traffic.
So I remember Nora Gaganis used to always say, okay, it's kind of like putting wood on the fire. You put a big log on the fire, you can go about your business, the house is going to stay nice and warm, you can do things, but if you've got the carbohydrates that you want to burn, then you're using little sticks and paper, and they burn real fast.
And you have to continuously monitor the fire.
Yeah, so
feed the fire.
Yeah, and those are good analogies because that's just about how the body works. So what they're saying in this study is if you use the fat type of diet that we're on, low protein, high fat, low carbohydrates, your body kind of mimics what happens when you go into a ketosis state if you are fasting. So even if you ate lots of carbohydrates and you didn't eat for a few days, your body gets kicked into burning fat because the carbohydrates are gone.
Gone, right. Well,
the other thing is that the reverse really doesn't happen. So if you're burning carbohydrates and now you need to tap into your fat sources because your carbohydrates are gone, that's when you get that real low feeling. And you feel you feel that crash. You get very hungry. You might get irritated. And this is why we have always said, and we've always thought that the ketogenic diet or the paleo style diet, which is high fat and low carbs and low protein, is probably the way we were designed. Yeah. Because a hunter that is hungry needs to still have his mind. He still needs to be quiet. He still needs to be stealthy.
Focused.
He needs to be focused. And on a high carbohydrate diet, that seems not to be possible.
Well, I think the point of this article was also that the human body is adapted to all kinds of conditions. Now, there may be times when you have plenty of food, times when there's food scarcity and food insecurity, and when the body has to be able to maintain itself and continue to stay relatively healthy. So, and the stem cells to make the repairs have to be in place. So the body developed, if you fast, then you switch over to the fat burning and the stem cells are strong and they resist stress better. Even though they're not.
Remember, while you're just digesting food, so this whole American paradigm of eating 3 to 6 times a day, especially if you're bodybuilding or high value athlete, very competitive. You need to eat 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day. You always need to have, you need to fuel yourself. That would be correct, perhaps, if we were our fuel was consistently just carbohydrates or glucose. But if you were burning fat all the time, you wouldn't need that. And certainly in past times, we didn't have that. So this is relatively new that we're burning carbs on a continuous basis. Perhaps in certain times of the year, carbs are available, like fruit. And, you come along a fruit tree and you're very hungry and you eat everything. And then you start gaining some weight. Well, it's probably fall.
And you get a stomach ache.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah. But our naturally designed system seems to work really well in repairing the body. But if you're digesting food all the time, your body is so busy digesting that you don't.
It takes away from all the others.
It takes away. It actually doesn't occur.
Shuts off.
Yeah. You have to be non-digesting food. You have to be in that certain state for your body to start repairing, especially the stem cells, like you said.
No, and we found when we just kind of naturally evolved into not eating lunch.
Yeah, after a few years of in the paleo diet, our hunger kind of just left us behind. So if we ate a breakfast, then at lunchtime we weren't hungry anymore.
Well, the interesting thing for me was when I worked at an office, come lunchtime, I was ready for a break.
That too.
So you'd say, "Oh, I'm hungry," when you really weren't hungry, but you just wanted a break, and so you had food and you ate it. When I started working from home, I realized, number one, I wasn't hungry. And number two, I never even thought about it. So I didn't suddenly at around noon or 1 jump up from my chair and think, gosh, I'm starving. I never even thought about it.
Well, the thing is too that if you're not eating donuts in the morning, like a lot of offices, somebody brings in the donuts and everybody goes, "Oh, all right." You start having a donut or
That
two.
sugar spike, right?
Yeah, and plus the processed, and plus it's fried. There's a lot of things that are not good about donuts, although
But they taste wonderful.
But they taste wonderful, yeah. But what happens, of course, you have that sugar crash in a few hours, probably 2 or 3 hours.
Right, and then you want lunch.
Then you want lunch, exactly. So we gave that up, and everything has been much better. Your weight stays the same.
Yeah, exactly the same.
And,
in fact, I lost a little.
And the other funny thing is, too, that dinner time comes along, and we kind of made our dinner half of what it used to be, simply because we eat that protein first, and then we don't have much vegetables or any a lot of times. And if we eat any dessert, it's usually chocolate or maybe a little ice cream or something like that, which seems to work just fine.
Yeah, well, but
if
also
we had vegetables too, maybe it wouldn't. I don't know.
No, but for us, in addition to that, what we discovered when we started eating only organic and free range and naturally fed and finished, grass fed and finished beef and pork and chicken and all of that was the meat is much richer.
Yes.
And denser.
Yeah, you have to cook it a little different. You have to learn how to make it a little rarer than you would normally, I think. But those things are pretty simple.
Yeah, but the point was that you ended up with, when I eat a quarter of a chicken, sometimes depending on the size, sometimes they're really big and then I can't even finish it.
But even a pork chop we don't finish.
And well, we buy really nice, really gorgeous, locally raised, grass-fed and free range and locally slaughtered pork chops and all of it. They're thick cut too. So, and we found that before we were eating 2 pork chops.
Yeah.
But they were much smaller. 2 pork chops for dinner each. Yeah. Then when we switched to the organic, it became 1 pork chop because we just couldn't eat anymore.
Yeah. So in here it says calorie restriction has been well documented that long-term calorie restriction extends the lifespan and promotes the overall health of laboratory animals, but it is difficult for people to maintain a very low calorie diet for months or years. Periodic fasting has been explored as another way to obtain the health benefits of calorie restrictions, but the effects of intermittent fasting on the body and its ability to regenerate damaged or aging tissues had not been well studied. Yeah. But fasting, or alternatively eating a ketogenic diet high in fat and low in carbohydrates, a popular weight loss technique, causes the body to enter a state called ketosis, in which fat is the primarily energy source. Ketone bodies are byproducts of this fat metabolism. And what happens is that you don't get hungry, you're very satisfied, and now your body can start repairing on a really high level. So further research showed that muscle stem cells from fasting animals were smaller and divided more slowly than those of non-fasting animals, but they were also more resilient. In other words, they survived better when grown.
Over time.
Yeah, over time. They also survived transplantation back into the animals better, so they took these things out and put them in the lab dish to study them. Petri dish. But then when they reintroduced them, those animals, even if they were not fasting, they discovered that they acted like they were fasting just by putting those ketones into. So there's a lot of study now being done on just having people introduce ketones, even if they have a bad diet. This has been shown to actually work. Yeah, so not that we're promoting people to eat your bad diet and now you have some medication as far as ketones. We're not saying that, but we're saying that's how powerful these things are.
Well, it also goes, again, it talks about the cells evolved to exist in times of abundance and in times of deprivation. They had to be able to survive when food was not readily available. Ketone bodies arise when the body uses fat for energy, but they also push stem cells into a quiescent state that protects them during the deprivation times. So then they're protected from environmental stress, but they don't work on regenerating damaged tissue. But again, if your body's under extreme environmental stress, food scarcity and so on, your concern is to remain, to keep your cells able to get back to work when conditions change.
Well, from a hunter's standpoint, is when you're starving and there's not much food around, you still have the ability to wait, be stealthy, still be a good hunter.
Right.
And so when the animal crosses your path, you can still, have your meal. And that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
It says it would be beneficial if the effects of fasting on stem cells could be attained through ketone bodies, supplementing the need to fast or
To eat a ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
So I think there's some combination, and that's why we talk about intermittent fasting, where we're talking about just if you eat breakfast and then you don't eat again till dinner, that's your intermittent fasting, gives your body a chance to regenerate.
Same thing that happens at night. So you eat
when you
at 6
sleep.
o'clock or something like that, and
Yeah.
then you have that break. And that's why we call breakfast the breaking the fast,
Right.
of course. Next article is by
Monday
The
Minute.
Guardian, and this is called Our Entire Civilization Depends on Animals. It's time we recognize their true value.
Yeah, at the point of this article, there was so much stuff in this article that I was like highlighting every paragraph. But the point is that without animals, our biosphere it's not balanced. Everything works together. Animals are vital to the functioning of the biosphere in innumerable ways. Their interactions with plants, fungi, and microbes sustain the conditions on which we depend.
With all the other life, so everything is
everything's
very balanced.
everything's part of the entire picture here. And it says, for example, the great whales that sit at the pinnacle of marine food webs are linked to some of the most fundamental processes that shape conditions in our world. They eat other marine creatures, including krill, and in the process, they take the nutrients from the deeper water and release it via their waste into the ocean, where they fertilize the blooms of planktonic algae. Then as the plankton grow, they extract carbon from the atmosphere and release oxygen. And it just, there's a whole circle and cycle of interactions and reactions. Photosynthetic plankton, then powered by sunshine, are at the base of the food webs that feed the rest of the marine animal life, including the fish.
Yeah. And these are the large animals of the sea, and it is the same thing for the large animals
On the land.
Which unfortunately many have disappeared. But you just take the American buffalo, you can see that large herds of buffalo sustain this land very well because they're eating the grasses and they're pooping on the air. Everything gets recycled.
But they say also things like pollination of plants. Bees, wasps, ants, butterflies, and beetles, and sometimes birds and bats all contribute to pollinating the plants. And then whoever eats the fruit, whichever animal eats the fruits and so on, then they distribute the seeds around the forest because seeds don't get digested.
It's a magical system, and our ancient ancestors seem to know this and revered nature of every form. And we don't seem to have that connection anymore as much. I think eating the animals themselves puts that connection back in. I think if we're talking about vegans and people who are getting away from eating meat, you also get away from this whole concept of everything.
The balance
of
cycle.
everything. So I really truly believe that we can probably subsist on just plant food. But, when we started out here, everything was eating everything, and this is the way the world seems to work. Our 20-year experiment of eating a ketogenic lifestyle diet has proved to me, at least personally to me, that we're on the right path because of the way we feel when we eat this and how easily this sustains us, how we do not get hungry, and if we miss a meal, it's not a big deal. Even if we missed a day or two, we would probably be okay. It's not a shock to the system because our system is working the way I think that it was intended to. And our modern day way of eating more carbohydrates, I think, has put a damper on this whole thing. And I think it's the introduction of all the modern diseases. We have new diseases that keep popping up with our immune system.
A lot of autoimmune diseases.
Yeah, and I think that really has to do with what we're eating. It's not the only thing naturally. What we breathe in and what we drink and all that stuff makes a big difference too.
Yeah,
you're right. This is a large article, but I really am impressed by how deeply they go into it.
Yeah, this also talks about the fact that right now there's so much chemical pest control, and yet there are so many songbirds, bats, beneficial insects such as ladybirds. I think it might be ladybugs.
Probably.
Bring billions of dollars worth of value by controlling aphids, caterpillars, and other insects that will attack crops.
Yeah.
And that's,
Well, we've really gotten out of balance, and being out of balance is why we use pesticides and fertilizers. We want to feed the ground nutrients, so we need fertilizer.
Because we've depleted them, and we haven't rotated the crops.
The animals aren't here anymore in abundance.
And we haven't rotated the crops, and we haven't...
And my first indication of this is when my dad, back in the 50s, went to the Everglades. And we looked at the birds, and they were just, every tree had hundreds of birds. And when I went back into the late 70s, back to the Everglades, there were birds here and there, but you and I have gone back into the 90s.
A couple years ago, we went back into, we drove across. With one bird, we saw one bird.
Yeah, we see one bird over the horizon, and maybe we drive for miles, and we might see another bird.
We saw one.
Yeah, I know. It was devastating.
One bird.
If our civilization is to survive and thrive, we must shift our collective perspective away from being primarily a self-centered species with demands that must be met and interests that must be served, to seeing ourselves as part of the wider natural system in which we have responsibilities towards each other's and other life forms. This is not only an ethical agenda, but a question of survival. For if we wish to continue living on Earth, our life-supporting systems must be protected and repaired. So our life repairing systems are really the animals and the bugs and everything else besides us.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so last week we talked about this trial of cancer.
Rectal cancer treatment using stem cells.
Yes. And
from the person.
From the person, yeah. So now we have a small cancer.
And the result was complete remission. It was a very small trial, but every one of the participants had complete remission, and 2 years later were still cancer-free.
So now we have a small cancer trial resulting in complete remission for all participants. Sounds like the same thing. And when I first started reading this, I thought this was, this is old hat. But it's not.
No, at this time they found another alternative way of treating the rectal cancer that again got 100% remission, and 2 years later they were still in remission, and they used immunotherapy, particular medications called dostarlimab, and it revs up the immune system. It has basically the same effect that was described in the article on the stem cells.
Yes.
That it created, let's see, they helped the immune system recognize that the cancer is foreign and strengthen the immune system.
Whereas before it was kind of hidden and it wouldn't pop itself up saying this is the problem.
Right, and the cancer cells would hide and so on. So they said that all 12 participants completed the treatment, and so this was immunotherapy and not stem cells, but it seems to have worked quite well.
Yeah, they're completely...
25 months later, they're still cancer-free.
Still cancer-free.
And again, as we talked about last week with the stem cell treatments, the rectal cancer is a particularly insidious type of cancer because when it's treated first with chemotherapy,
Right.
then with
Very
radiation,
invasive. Yeah.
and then with surgery.
Yeah. So you have to
And then
remove
you have
things too.
immense
Yeah.
impact on all of some really important systems in your body. And it even could impact childbearing potential, bowel and bladder function, fertility, just so many things. And this way is completely non-invasive and does not require all those chemicals to kill cells in your body. And
Yeah,
so
it's
on.
interesting that both of these were on the rectum, which is
Rectal, yeah.
which has particular properties that make things slippery, and the cells regenerate themselves faster, I think, in those areas.
Yeah, I haven't
because
looked
of
into
that.
it. So.
But it's an interesting 2 studies now that are in the same time frame, and both very, very successful.
Using 2 different approaches, but
with our modern society, what happens is that once we get it, it seems like it transfers.
then opportunities and options.
Yeah, so this is going to be looking very good to cancer treatments in the future.
We'll see how it can translate to other types of cancer.
Yeah. So here's an interesting article, and this comes from
Ars Technica,
Yeah, why can't
which
we
means
remember
technical arts.
Why can't we remember being born or our first words? Yeah. And this has to do with memory, of course. Most people can't remember events from their first few years of their lives, a phenomenon which researchers have dubbed infantile amnesia. But if we can't remember the things that happened to us when we were infants, when does memory actually start?
Yeah, and that was when you and I were looking at this article, I thought, I wonder if it has anything to do with words.
That's exactly what
and
I was going to.
It turns out, because you can't, if you have no words,
all you have is an image.
You can't describe it. So you can't tell a person what your memory is. You may have the memory.
Or even tell yourself, perhaps.
Yeah, and you may have the memory as a visual or just a residual experience, but you can't tell anybody about it because you had no words at that time to attach.
And perhaps you can't even tell yourself.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. And it says, research suggests that infants can form memories, but the way they say is that memories are things that we tell ourselves, which is kind of an interesting way to look at them. But babies don't have the words to tell themselves anything verbally.
This is what I remember from reading J. Krishnamurti from India.
Krishnamurti.
Yeah, so he was talking always about thinking. Okay. And he says, of course, we can think in pictures, but traditionally we think in words. Mm-hmm. And without the word, the image is not as clear. It might be more clear in a sense, too.
Well, yeah, it depends on what you're thinking about. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Because when we put things into words, then we focus on certain parts of the image. We pick out certain things. This is gorgeous, and this is, or maybe this is not gorgeous. I don't want to look at it. Mm-hmm. But we focus on a particular thing according to our emotions.
Well, the interesting thing for me was, for example, the first time we drove into a grove of aspens, and the sun was shining through the trees, and the leaves were shivering in the breeze, and I have a vivid picture in my mind. I have no words attached to it at all. It's just picture in my mind. So, and other things I remember something somebody said. And we've talked often about how music evokes a whole experience of lifetime, of that particular time in your life.
Yeah. So what's your first memory?
Oh, I have no idea. I don't know I don't remember anything until nursery school, really. I mean, I don't remember my sister being born. I was 2.5, Mm-hmm. I don't remember living in Chapel Hill, North Carolina as a small, a toddler. I don't remember. I remember my brother being born, of course, by that time I was 5.
Yeah.
And I remember isolated things about nursery school.
Yeah, my memory goes back to Holland. Of course, I was 6 when we left. I remember kindergarten. I remember getting lost at the beach once. I would think I must have been 4 or 5. I remember walking home from school a couple of times. I remember some particular structures and things like that, buildings that.
Yeah, but you were already 6 and older at that point.
Well, yeah, at that time I was probably in the first
when
grade.
you were, do you have recollection of your grandparents
Yes.
before you moved?
Yes.
Okay, so, and then how far back do those go? Do you know?
I think about 3 years old. I remember getting stung by a bee, and I was 3 years old. That time it was right on the lip.
Of course.
I was going to die. Yeah.
But the point is, you had words at that point.
Yes.
You were speaking.
And I really do think that they're correct. That your words is what kind of ensures that you do remember it.
Yeah, it says infants can form memories. They can recall their mother's face. They can distinguish it from the face of a stranger. And then as family members or friends of the family or siblings become familiar to them, they can recognize those faces.
Right.
They may not, they have no understanding of who they, how they're related to them or but they recognize the face or the voice. And there are lots of different kind of memories. This article calls the word memories autobiographical, where they describe something that happened to you in your life.
Right.
And there are also semantic memories, which are memories of facts, like names of different varieties of apples or the capital of your home state. There are procedural memories, that tell you how do you do something, what steps do you take, like opening your front door or driving the car, and it's just, it shows that this particular study also talks about some tests that were done, and small children were let's see, they had a training session. They trained an infant they started with the 2 to 6 month olds, and they placed an infant in a crib with a mobile hanging above them. And they were watching the baby kick and just get an idea of how normally just lying in the crib, how much they kicked.
Right.
Then they tied a string from the baby's leg to the end of the mobile. So whenever the baby kicked, the mobile moved. And the infants quickly learned that if they kicked their foot, the mobile would move. And so they were 2 to 6 months old at the time. Then they had a 6 to 18 month old, but this time what they did was they sat on their parents' lap with their hands on a lever. And the lever made the train move around the track. So first they didn't have the lever connected. So they were just trying to see how many times would a baby just touch the lever or push the lever. Then they connected it, and every time the infant pressed it, the train moved around the track. Well, they very quickly learned about that, and they would press the lever much more frequently to see the train move. Now, then they talked about, well, how long does that memory, how long does it last? And they found at 6 months, if an infant was trained for 1 minute, they can still remember an event a day later at 6 months old. Older infants, the older the infants were, the longer they remembered. And also that if you can get infants to remember events, you can get infants to remember events longer by training them for a longer period of time and reminding them from time to time so that they learn.
Yeah, and this is before they have words.
Before they have words.
Yeah. Very interesting. So let's move on to the last article, and this is kind of connected. Want to be more decisive? Brain scientists debunk one major myth about choice.
Yeah, this was interesting.
Yeah, I've always been an indecisive person. The author says what to wear, which menu to pick, or which item from the menu to pick, when to do house chores, always thinking about through scenarios before making your choices. This sounds like you're not unusual. Most people struggle with these issues. Our new research may not be help you choose which restaurants to go into it, but it might reassure you. So what they're saying, decisive people may move, may be more confident in the choices they make, but they're no better at making decisions than the rest of us.
Yeah.
So this seems like the difference between the people who are more decisive is that they're confident that their decision is the right one.
Yeah, well, he talks about there are action-oriented people who focus on action, doing something. They're more decisive, flexible, and likely to implement their intentions in the face of adversity.
Yeah, then there's the others.
They call the other type is state-oriented, and they use the word state to mean your emotional state. They're indecisive, they struggle to commit to their choices, and they abandon their commitments more frequently. So they did a whole bunch of tests and figured out, they looked at how fast you process and acquire new information, how much do you need to know before you're going to commit to the choice, how much choice is influenced by prior knowledge, prior experience, metacognitive sensitivity, how accurately you can judge the correctness of your choice, metacognitive bias, how confident you are about your decision. And they found that action-oriented people and state-oriented people were pretty much the same, with one difference. The action-oriented people were more confident about their choices.
So they felt better about it.
Yeah, they felt better and proceeded.
This brings to mind whether diet would play a role in this. In other words, if you're high carbohydrate, your thinking process is much more active. You're all over the place, perhaps. You're thinking of this, you're thinking of that.
Get easily distracted. Because now you're hungry and things like that. So there's interference. And I'm wondering if you're on a ketogenic diet, maybe you're a lot calmer. So that calmness probably brings you more into a state of being more positive, more receptive, more confident, more clear.
Yeah, and this is just my own interpretation. This study doesn't have anything to do with that, but it does have the difference between being confident and being decisive. So the only difference between the two groups across all experiment was the action-oriented people were always more confident in their choices. There's no difference in accuracy. There's no difference in speed, cautiousness. There's no bias.
No difference in bias
or sensitivity. The action-oriented group was just more confident despite not being any faster, any better, or more accurate.
Yeah, and it says, indecisive people are in no way worse at making choices. Indecisive people can process the evidence as fast and harness prior knowledge just as effectively as decisive people. And careful consideration can pay dividends when making life-changing choices, like choosing a university or buying a house. And it says, but being less or more confident of the choice that has been made does not affect the outcome, but it can influence future ones. State-oriented people are less confident about whether the choice is right, and that makes pursuing their goals just a much greater challenge. They don't rely on past experience or past knowledge the way an action person does.
This would definitely, in leadership, be a huge thing, because if your leaders all over, well, maybe we should do this, maybe we should do that, go back and forth, where a leader would say, this is the way we're going, follow me.
Yeah, well, leadership is a little bit more complicated than that. It's the ability to build consensus and to inspire enough trust and confidence in you as the leader to be able to get people to see that it will work or that they feel okay about it. And it's not a matter, because you can't, if you just say, follow me, you're going to find yourself walking by yourself.
Right, I understand what you're saying, but what I'm thinking is that if you're more confident in yourself, that is going to brush off into other people, because I'm sure of where I'm going. Here, follow me, rather than, well, I'm not sure if this is the way or not, but you want to go this way, you want to go that way. You're going to be following the person that's sure, normally.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it brings to mind my experience one time I was at a wedding or a bar mitzvah or something, and I just walked into the room where the food was going to be served, the dining area. And one of the staff people came up to me and asked me a question about what needed to be done. And so just, for whatever reason, that person looked at me and saw a person who could take charge.
Yep.
And I don't know what kind of vibe I was giving off or whatever, But my answer was, let's find so-and-so, and that person will be able to give you the answer. And that's how I've always approached.
Yes.
I approach my law practice that way, and that's how I approach life.
Yep.
Let's find a solution. Let's get to the person who knows, because I don't need to be the person who knows. And I think that's an important character trait. If you don't need to be the center, and you don't need to be the only one who has the key information, but if you're willing to explore it with other people, to work as a team, to find the answer, to get somebody else involved, all of that makes a huge difference to your ability to lead and also your ability to make decisions.
Yep. Great article. I recommend reading it, folks, and making up your own mind. That's what we do with all these articles, and trying to explore and see what's going on out there. So if you want to be more decisive, I know one thing. This is the last.
We're definitely
over the
going
show.
On vacation.
Yes, we are. That's right. So next week, no show. Yeah, I almost forgot about that. So
yeah, it's my birthday. This is my birthday month, and my goal is to celebrate for an entire month. And so
we've been doing that pretty
we're
good.
leaving on Friday, coming back the following Friday. And
yeah, and we'll let you know where we're at, where we've been, and
just going to have a little overland adventure and get to see my college roommate, whom I haven't seen in probably 56 years.
yeah, that's going to be amazing for sure. So we're excited for that. We're excited to hit the road for a week or so, and we'll be excited when we get back too.
And we'll
so.
see you in 2 weeks.
Okay, thanks a lot for sticking around.
Be well.
Bye-bye now.